Help of Hashem, we are learning Moed Katan Daf Tes. We are learning today's Daf Le'iloi Nishmas Yosef ben Fraji. May his neshama have an aliyah. We left off on Daf Tes, a medal of 6 lines from the top of the Amid. We are beginning to find the sources for the rule known as Ein Ma'arvin or Ein Ma'arvin, Simcha B'Simcha. We're not supposed to intermingle one joyous occasion with another joyous occasion, and that's going to lead us into many amazing details of the celebration that our grandparents had, led by Shlomo HaMelech, when the first Beis HaMikdash finished and we made its inauguration. As we know that exactly 7 days before Sukkot is where we celebrated the Chanukas of the Beis HaMikdash, and that went straight into the next 7 days of Sukkot. We're going to learn how the importance of getting permission from the tzaddik to take leave when you live in the city of a tzaddik. And even if you already got, so to say, the permission, the reshus to leave, if you, for whatever reason, you overnighted in the city when you thought you're not, and you're only leaving the next day, you got to get permission. Nachamol. Again, we're gonna have this question when a person has 2 mitzvahs in front of them, or they foresee that in the near future there will be 2 mitzvahs coming for them to fulfill, and they know they can only pick one or the other. So there's a little bit of a paradox as to sometimes we have the approach, the first one that comes, do. Other times we say, have foresight, and if you could only do one of the 2, wait for the bigger one. However you define the bigger one, and we're going to reconcile that paradox. We're going to have a whole discussion of contrasting Torah and mitzvahs, and to determine what's greater, learning Torah or keeping mitzvahs. And this is, you should know, this is such a foundational theme that we have in Chassidus, as we'll quote when we will learn the sugya. We're going to have a very enigmatic story of the son of Rab Shimon Bar Yochai, who got a bracha from 2 great Tanoim, Rabbi Yonasan ben Asmai and Rabbi Yehuda ben Gedim, and they verbalized the bracha in a way where it didn't sound like a bracha. And how the son of the Rashbi went to his father, and the father unpackaged those words. So we're going to speak about this whole idea of giving a hidden bracha, and maybe one of the reasons why that is done. We're going to go back to the laws of Chol HaMoed, as we learned in the Mishnah, regarding women who are allowed to both practice hygiene and to put on makeup during Chol HaMoed. The Gemara is going to attempt to differentiate between a younger woman and an older woman, and the Gemara beautifully says that when it comes to putting on makeup, an older woman is a younger woman, and therefore she may. And finally, we're going to learn how drinking beer regularly has some sort of bodily effect, including which one grows out a lot of hair. Mistama, not where you want it to grow out, and a lot more. And we're going to start Chevra Nachmal Tes, a medal of 6 lines from the top of the Amid. Okay, so based on the rule in the Mishnah, that ein noisin nashim b'moed, you can't have what we call a wedding on Chol HaMoed. And from the 4 reasons that we gave, right, there was an approach known as ein ma'arvin simcha b'simcha. Don't intermingle. You're celebrating Yom Tiv, celebration of marriage, but when you focus, you really get involved in one simcha, you detach from the other simchas. And that's the concept logically, that you don't intermingle one with the other, but we obviously need to have a source in Scripture. Says the Gemara, the Ein Marvin Simcha B'Simcha Min Alon, D'chsiv, a pasuk in Melachim, that Vayash Shloimoi Ba'esahi Esachok, that Shlomo HaMelech instituted the celebration. We're speaking about the celebration that was done when we finished the building of, and therefore when we inaugurated the first Beis HaMikdash. And V'chol Yisrael Imoi, all the Jewish people who were with him. Kahal Gadol, a huge gathering of people. From where? From Milavai Hamas until Nachal Mitzrayim. Means Yidden from all over the Holy Land came to Yerushalayim. Lifnei Hashem Elokeinu. And listen to these words. They celebrated Shivas Yamim, 7 days. Now guys, the first wide line. And the Shivas Yamim, and another 7 days. Now again, Nachamol, the celebration began exactly 7 days before Sukkot. Since the 7 days of the celebration of the inauguration of the Beis HaMikdash ended mamish by Sukkot, everyone was there. Bachlal, he didn't go to the regal, regardless, but you had this big celebration, and then it went another 7 days, a total of Arba Asar Yoim, a total of 14 days. Now, the Isa, the Ma'arvin Simcha B'Simcha, if one would be allowed to intermingle one Simcha with the other, why wouldn't Shlomo HaMelech wait to begin firing the celebration on the holiday of Sukkot, ume'evad, and he would accomplish that the 7 days of Sukkot would be both lahacha ulahacha. It's an interesting proof. In other words, people that are, what do you call them, party animals, won't right away identify with the question. Like, why would we have a 7-day celebration if we can have a 14-day celebration? Obviously, the Gemara over here doesn't think that way. If we would be allowed to put it together, it would have been more practical. Our working people have to make a living to support those party animals. So, okay, we're celebrating, it would have been a double celebration, but do it all together. So the Gemara says that's not a proof. Because maybe when the moment they finish the building, who says you are allowed to delay a celebration? Maybe the only reason why they celebrated the inauguration 1 week prior is because they finished the building 1 week prior. And you're not allowed to delay a celebration. Parenthetically, I want you to know that there was a discussion regarding even the siyum of a Masechta, whether you are allowed to delay the celebration. Now we do that, but the great people, it's so common. Before Pesach, it's already a few months before Pesach. We have to make a siyum to circumvent or to celebrate the tainas b'chaydim in a positive way. All right, so I'll leave the last 2 lines until then. So there's a concept that maybe you're not allowed to do that. We're good. Abimaz will learn, and you can do it. Just learn more. But when it comes to the building of the Beis Hamikdash, that's why they didn't intermingle. So the Gemara says, hold on, but maybe that's part of the question. Maybe if they would have finished Mamish Erev Sukkot, then they would have been allowed to celebrate Sai, the holiday of Sukkot, and the Chanukas Habayis. So the Gemara says, if that would have been the case, then they would have, why do you think they finished? Why wouldn't they have left some little thing undone? Like we just mentioned, leave a couple of lines for later, and then do it later, which is less problematic. No, if you finish it, you have to celebrate. But they could have delayed something. The Gemara says it's not true. You're not allowed to stop. You're not allowed to delay the finalization, the completion of the building. And therefore, again, it's no raya. If the Taka would have finished Erev Sukkot, then maybe we would be allowed to intermingle. It didn't happen that way. So the Gemara pushes back. Amma kalya oirev is that on the roof of the building proper, on the roof of the antechamber and the hechel, the ulam and the hechel, there were amma around 18 or 19 inches by 18 and 19 inches tiles that had protruding out of it, going up, razor sharp edges. And whoever saw models of the Beis Hamikdash, you'll always see that zigzag, beautiful, razor-looking question. Was it only in the periphery? Was it everywhere? And that was to prevent birds from settling, thus making shmutz on top of the Beis Hamikdash. It's called the crow chaser. Just in other words, amma of kalya oirev. So that's something that's not really part of the temple proper, but maybe the proof is that is something that they would have been allowed to delay, and it would have justified delaying the celebration. So we do have a proof. The fact that they didn't do it is because ye'ein ma'arvan simcha b'simcha, and the Gemara still doesn't accept that. Amma kalya oirev tzarich binyan bayasu. No, just like very good picture. Just like prior to putting up the Am Yakal Oirev, you don't make a celebration for the Chanukas HaBayis. Taka, why? Because it's part of the bayis. If it's part of the bayis, you can't delay it. In other words, we're back to saying there is no raya. So the Gemara says you're right. You know what the proof is from? The proof is mamish from Scripture. There is a redundancy here in the wordings of the pasuk that we quoted from Elachim. Why? Michti, behold, it says at the end of the verse, we de facto celebrated for 14 days, Arba Asar Yom, which we did. Why did the Torah have to begin by writing 7 days and 7 days? That's Gavaldik. No, the Torah could have said we celebrated for 14 days. It would have been self-understood. It was the 7 days for the Chanukas Habayis. Then it just happened to coincide with the beginning of Sukkot, so we had another 7 days for Sukkot. So, right, 14 days. Shmami, no, 7 and 7, that we're not allowed to intermingle them. Hani lechud, v'hani lechud, gevaldik. So what do we know now? Guys, Yom Kippur is 5 days before Sukkot, right? Because, Shem Hashem, there are 4 days in between. Now that we're saying that the celebration prior to Sukkot for the Chanukas Habayis was 7 days, you know what? That year, we did not fast. I remember, I forgot which year, the people that know better, that when the Rebbe was speaking once Erev Rosh Hashanah, after the Rebbe, the Avodah was unimaginable. The Rebbe gave out lekach, they're ready for a few days. And then there was another then there was a talk afternoon, and it was late. The Rebbe began to say that there must be people there that are thinking that we have to go home to eat. This is before Yom Kippur. And the Rebbe gave a long talk about the sugya. The Rebbe was speaking that Mashiach is coming now and the Beis HaMikdash, God willing, will be built now. And if that were to happen, then that one time you won't have to fast. All right, let's go back. That year, we were not in the state of affliction because we were eating and drinking. However, after Yom Kippur, the people got worried and they said, euphemism. Maybe the enemies of the Jewish people, they meant themselves, are deserving, God forbid, of extermination because we all ate and drank on Yom Kippur. So Yatzah Baskol va'amra, and they all heard a heavenly voice that said to them, Kulcham mizumanim l'chaye ha'olam haba. All of you, right, are designated l'chaye ha'olam haba. The boyfriend Sachos means, yeah, I'll meet you there. You guys are dying. No, it doesn't mean that. It means that your guys are tzaddikim. It means that it was not a failing. And now we have to understand, what do you mean they were worried? What you think they spontaneously ate and drank, and then the day after they says, oh my God, what did we do? No, they must have had a reason for which they felt they are allowed to eat and drink. But then we have to figure out, why did they worry later? What was the shakel of Atari? So my darush, they must have made a drasha which justified their eating and drinking. So they made a kal v'chomer, which is, now this is a stretch, Uma Mishkan, she'ein kidushas kedushas olam. How do I know that the kedusha of the Mishkan is not internal? Very simple, Chavra. By the very fact that after the Mishkan was not in existence, bamais were allowed to be used again. Amongst many other things, where the location of the Mishkan never became holy. When you moved it from one location to the other, the prior location had no more kedusha. And, now listen to this. When we inaugurated the Mishkan, Chavra Parshas Nasai, so for the first 12 days, every day, a leader of a tribe led the celebration by bringing karbanos, without getting into why, because it's a big daf. That carbon, halachically, is called a private carbon. Normally, private karbanos do not override the Shabbos. It overrode the Shabbos there. And it was a carbon yachid, and yet, v'doiches Shabbos, and Shabbos is hu'ah. Shabbos is even more than Yom Kippur. If you want to measure a mitzvah by looking at its punishment for its violation, if a person, God forbid, violates Shabbos, with Eidim, with Hasra, Chayiv Skila, capital sin. If a person, God forbid, violates works on Yom Kippur, then they get Kaddish. Terrible, but not as bad as from this angle. So 1 second. But nevertheless, Doiches Shabbos, now Doiches Shabbos doesn't mean that they broke the Shabbos by working. It means they brought Karbanis. We'll see how this stretched. So they said, Mikdash, which is much greater, Emes, the Kedushas Eilam. The place remains holy. I mean, we paskin, the Kitshalo Shaita, Kitshalo Asad. Even if you don't follow that approach, even let's say with that Ivit or those who hold that it doesn't have the Mamish, the Kedusha, okay, but there is no Heter Bamas. The effect of the building of the Beis HaMikdash is certainly an eternal effect. Yerushalayim eternally is the place for. Okay, and this is important. The karbanos that were brought during the inauguration are karbanos sibur, which means they have greater power to override a counter value. What will be the counter value? Bringing a karban on Yom Kippur. Guys, we're not speaking about eating and drinking. We're speaking about karbanos in celebration of the inauguration. And Yom Kippur is not as severe as Shabbos. Yom Kippur is only Arush Kaddish. So kol shchein that what? Nushuki Kol Shchein, that they were allowed to bring karbanos, that they can bring their one-time inaugural karbanos. So the Gemara right away says, no, very nice, shkoyach. So 1 second, so that they were allowed to do.
Well, eating and drinking.
Wait, we'll get there. So before we even go to the eating and drinking, but you have a kal v'chomer, ella, amay hoyu da'agim. So why are they worried? So the Gemara says, I'll tell you why they're worried. Because Hasam Tzoydech Gevaya. And when we inaugurated the Mishkan, what did we do? We brought karbanos, which is something called Tzoydech Gevaya. It's for it to satisfy the need of the one up high. Over here, it's not only that they brought the karbanos, Tzorech Hedyet. And indeed, so Hachinami Mevad Levdu Mechal Nechel Lishtu. No, that was the worry. But 1 second, but why did they eat and drink to begin with? You know why? The Gemara says, yeah. You know why they ate and drank? Because based on the Kal V'chomer, which was the base for them being allowed to celebrate by bringing karbanos. But once a bringing of a carbon is a reason for celebration. Once you're in the mode of celebrating, how can you celebrate without eating and drinking? Leaders, hello, that's part of the simcha. In ein simcha b'lei achilu shasiyah. So all of this, chavre, was their kal v'chomer, but you can see how they got worried. Because the kal v'chomer was only really for bringing karbanos. They stretched it. They did it, and then they got worried. Now hold on. Mishkan, the Dachi Shabbos Minolan, how do you know that when we built the Mishkan, even though the Torah speaks about the 12 Nesiim, and everyone brought on a day, how do you know that they also brought it on Shabbos, especially since we are now saying that each Nasi's carbon is in the category of a carbon yachid, and a carbon yachid does not override Shabbos. Because it says Bayom Harishoin, right? Bayom Hasheni, and it says Ubayom Hashvi'i. Now Bayom Harishon, the Havamina does it mean Sunday? Bayom Hasheni means Shabbos? No, maybe Shvi means on the 7th day. They skip Shabbos. But the first day that there was a special inaugural carbon offering, a second day of the special inaugural, the seventh day doesn't mean that it came after the 6th day. It means they skipped over Shabbos. Amar Rab Nachman ben Yitzchak Amar Kra, and this is the proof, since it says, on the 11th day, B'yoim Ashtei Asar, Yoim. Ever notice that? It doesn't say B'yoim Ashtei Asar, on day 11. It says, on day 11th, day. The word Yoim is repeated. Why does the Torah repeat the word Yoim? To tell you the following rule. Ma Yoim Kula Ratzuf. A day, by definition, a day is a consecutive expansion of time. That's the meaning of a day. It's a hemshech of 24 hours. Yom is one unit of one without any breaks in the time. Af Ashta Yasser Kulan. All of the 11 days were the tzufim, were consecutive, and obviously in 11 days you got a Shabbos, no matter when it started, which means they didn't stop. They did bring the carbon of the Nesiim, which is called the carbon Yachad on Shabbos. Still, the Gemara says, I can still argue maybe it means that it was consecutive in the context that any day in which you were allowed to bring, they brought. They never skipped a day in which you were allowed to bring. How do you know? Still, it's not enough of a raya. So the Gemara says, because it says on the 12th day the same extra word. It says, B'yoim shneim asar yoim nachamol. Why yoim again? Yoim is extra. To tell you, ma yoim kulei ratzuf, af shneim asar yoim kulam ratzufim. Now here you can't argue, maybe here also it only means that it was consecutive, meaning that they never skipped a day in which you were allowed to bring. So the Gemara says then you wouldn't have the extra word day by the 11th, and again the extra word day by the 12th. The double yoim yoim, im kein trei, kroi lamali. Okay, so that was their kal v'chomer. And now we want to know Rabbi Yochanan's source. Where did Rabbi Yochanan get it that it was Doichi Yom Kippur? Like, is there an allusion to that they taka broke Yom Kippur? So Elam, if you're going to tell me because it says Arba Asar Yom, right? It says in the scripture that we just quoted that they celebrated for 14 days. No, maybe the same concept. They celebrated for 14 days on the days in which they were allowed to celebrate. On Yom Kippur, you're not allowed to celebrate it, so they passed over that day. So it began even a day earlier. So the Gemara says, Gomar Yom Yom Mahasam. That we have a Gezeidah Shabbat Rabbi Yochanan, since it says Yoim, and it says Yoim by the Mishkan, from that Rabbi Yochanan understood that they take celebrated on Yom Kippur. And what happened? That Yatzatza Baskol v'amru lahem kulcha mizumanim l'chaye ha'olam haba. It's interesting that many of us, those of us who learned Megillah, mamash, at the end of Megillah, we had the statement that mashgichen bebaskol. So that made we can pay attention to a baskol. Now that doesn't contradict the fact that Torah Lav Min Hashamayim, right, and Tanu Sholach Noim Bava Mitzia over there, Daf Nun Tes, that they didn't listen to a baskol. It's very different. There was an argument between opinions. So there, just because the baskol sided with one side, Rabbi Yeshua has the right to say we don't pay attention to a baskol because Torah Lav Hashamayim. Here there wasn't a machloikis. There was a worry, and a heavenly voice came out and says, "You guys are good." Now uminolon da achalahu. Where do we have in Scripture such an indication? Now, I know, guys, the word achal means forgiven, but I want to make it clear. It doesn't mean here forgiven the way the word forgiven normally means. Normally, forgiven means is that I made a mistake, and now I'm forgiven, God willing. Here it means that they never made a mistake. They were allowed to eat and drink, but they were worried that maybe they shouldn't have. And the baskol was megala that they never sinned. It was okay. Because the Tani Tachlifa we learned in a Braisa, it says, let's go back to the Psukim in Malachim, that Bayoim Hashmini on the 8th day, Shilach HaSo'am, King Solomon, he dismissed or he sent home the people. Now guys, what's the 8th day? The 8th day of Sukkot. Well, the 8th day, yeah, that's when he gave them a bracha. Vayivarchu es hamelech, and they blessed the king. Vayelchu la'olem, and then they went to their tents. Smeichim v'toy v'leiv al kol ha'toy v'asher asa Hashem l'David avdoi uli Yisrael amoy. We're going to touch every part of this verse. When it says that they went to their tents, it means sheholchu l'matzu n'shasem v'tahara, that all of the Eden that were there, whose wives were not, when they arrived home, right? The most painful thing is to arrive home. We had this, I think, in Nida and other places, and when one's wife is in a state of suffix Nida, that's the most painful thing. You have a doubt. But even better is that all of the wives were betara. Smeicha means shenehenu mizav hashchina. Toive leiv means shekol echad ve'echad nesabre ishtoi beben zachar. Like the Marsha says, that just like when the Moshe Rabbeinu was born, it says vatera oisoi, my friends, ki toiv. So toiv is an indication that not only were they tehoidim, but all these men, all these people had relations with their wives, and they all got pregnant, and they all gave birth 9 months later or 7 months later to a son. Then when it says in the verse, Al kol hatoiva, what's the kol? That's the indication to this Rabbi Yechanan. She yotza baskol v'yameres lehem, kulcha mizumanim l'chaye ha'olam haba. Why is that? Because what's toiva? The ultimate good. Good means olam haba. And the way Chassidus sides with the Ramban, just to make it clear, Olam Haba doesn't mean Gan Eden. Olam Haba means this world. After Tchias HaMesim, that's going to be the ultimate good. Now let's conclude the unpackaging of the verse. When it says, Li David Avdoi, Uli Yisrael Amoy. Now, the ending makes sense. Bishloim Li Yisrael Amoy. Yeah. In other words, we're emphasizing that all of the people, the Achaluhu Avoin Yom HaKippurim. No, they were worried that they broke Yom Kippur, and they were notified. So therefore, the good was for all the Jewish people. But why did we insert Lo David Avdoi Mayi? So here we have the famous Amar of Yehuda Amar Rav, that Bishah Shebikesh Shloimoi Lahachnis Aron LaMikdash. At some point, big machlokes where that happened, but in one of the sha'arim through which the Aron HaKodesh needed to pass through, prior to bringing the Aron Kodesh through that passageway, it was closed. Normally, doors are closed. You open them up. Miraculously, dafku sha'arim zalozeh. The doors clung to each other. They adhered to each other. And it wasn't opening. And people understood this is a spiritual thing. And for that, Amar Shloima Esrim va'arba nonis. If you're going to look, both verses in Malachim and again in Divrei Hayomim, Psukim speaking about that moment, you're going to see that there were many words of prayer, some of them beginning with the words Rina, some of them with the words Tchina, some of them with the words Tefillah. If you'll count, you'll see between Malachim and Divrei Hayomim, there's 24 prayers that were said. Why were there so many prayers said? Because that was the underlying prayer. We were praying for the doors to open up, and you know what? V'loi nana, God did not enter. Doors remained closed. Pasach v'aman. Then after the 24, King Solomon said, "So sha'aram l'sheichem." Now you appreciate these words, mamish. In other words, we're asking for the doors to be uplifted. It means they should open up, and still v'loi nana. But kiven sha'amar Hashem Elikim al tosheif b'nei mishichecha. Don't turn away your face from your anointed one, who's David. And he explicitly said, Zochra lachazde David avdecha. At the moment he mentioned his father, David, miyad nena, right away he was answered. And according to some midrashim, according to some opinions, answer means that the doors on their own opened up. It was mamish to make it clear that in the schus of David we have a Beis Hamikdash, and ba'oisasha, on that moment, nehepchu pnei soinei David kishuli hakadei, all the enemies of David who speak in a non-positive way about David, bringing down the story of Bathsheba to their level, understanding that it was a sin of their nature, and therefore they have a non-positive understanding of David HaMelech. At that moment, their faces turned as dark from shame as the bottom of a burnt pot, of a cholent pot, black. Because now it became known in public that Shemacha lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu al oisa oven. That's Ula David Avdoi. Now that we mentioned over here, the pasuk of Shlomo HaMelech sending away the people, that's the link. Now we're going to learn a phenomenal story. Let's begin. Rabbi Yonasan ben Asmai and the other Tana's colleague, Rabbi Yehuda ben Geidim, they were learning together Parshas Nedarim, which is really, it's Masechtas Nedarim. And what is one of the foundational Yesoides of Nedarim? The koyach of speech. That's the link. Because giving a bracha is using your speech for something positive, and a neder, theoretically, is not something negative theoretically, but we abstain from making nedarim, because since there is such power in speech, if I were to break my vow, oy gevalt, oy vaizmir, so don't make vows. But they were learning about the koyach of speech. Where were they learning it? Bay, in the yeshiva of Rab Shimon Bar Yochai. And like we mentioned in the intro, I have the schus, I remember this often, that when, I grew up in Brazil, and my father took me a lot to the Rebbe, and every time there was the airline was Varig, that was the Brazilian. It left 8 p.m. My father, he was the opposite of Jonathan Abasera, that can only leave 1 hour before the flight. He won't even leave his house before. My father would leave Mustamba 4 hours before the flight. Then he would start getting nervous. He has to be in the airport. The car can break down. There can be a flat tire. So the minig was that Rebbe used to go out to Mincha 3:15. My father used to daven Mincha with the Rebbe, but he would stand in the hallway under the magnet. When the Rebbe would come out, that's when Hasidim would take leave from the Rebbe. He would tell the Rebbe, or Rabbi Groner would many times tell the Rebbe, these people are traveling. You take leave, you get a bracha from the tzaddik before you go. So what happened was, ipatur minei be'urta. They took leave in the afternoon because they were going to leave that night, or they were going to leave that afternoon. And yes, Chevra, we know that you should only leave b'chitoiv, all the kashas. They were going to leave at a certain time, and on that day, they took leave. They got a bracha from the Rashbi, but whatever happened is, they didn't leave. They're going to leave the next morning. You know what these people did? They went back to the tzaddik to get another bracha. So, Litzafra in the morning, Hadur v'kam ifterei minei. They got another blessing. They took leave again. Amar lahu, so that the Rashbi, even though there were maybe hundreds of Hasidim taking leave, like the Rebbe, he remembered, you were here, you already got a bracha. V'lav if tirisu minei be'urta, did you not already get a bracha for me yesterday? So they responded, Amrulei, limadatanu rabbeinu, the Rebbe, you already taught us, Talmud shenifta mirabbai, that if a Talmud took leave from his teacher, but for whatever unforeseen reason, they did not leave. And therefore, Villan ba'oisohir, they slept in that city. So then, sarach lipat mimenu pamacheres. And when the Rashbi taught that law, that's just the link of the sugyas. He taught it from this pasuk. Sheneman, as it says, Vayom Hashmini, Shalach Hasoam, Vayivarchu as HaMelech. Now, Chevra, if you would need to use your fingers, knock yourselves out, Sukkot is on the 15th. So let me ask you, when is the 8th day? The 22nd. Okay, then it says in the next verse, Ubayoim Esrim Shleish L'Chodesh Hashvi, on the 23rd of Tishrei, Shilach Esoam, he dismissed them. And Shukka, you picked that up, because really, they couldn't leave, it's Yom Tov, I know that. They said goodbye, because they said goodbye. But they couldn't leave that day because it's Yantiv. So they went and they said goodbye again. Now, everything is connected over here. No, it's the idea of appreciating the importance, not only of saying goodbye to the tzaddik. But understanding the importance of doing it on the day that you're leaving, that's a symptom of the chassid being a chassidish person, a lofty person. And that Rashbi was very impressed with them to the point that Amar Lei Libere, that means that Rashbi told his son, B'nei Adam Halalu, these two, he's speaking about Rabbi Yonasan ben Asmai and Rabbi Yehuda ben Gedim, Anoshim shel tzurahem. What does it mean, Anoshim shel tzura? Let me tell you a Chassidish story, that the fourth Belzer Rebbe, Rabbi Aaron Rikeach, was called by our Rebbe a Jew that is tzura b'loi chaymer. Can you imagine? He's pure form without any chaymer. So everything is made out of a light and a vessel. He's only light. There's no vessel there anymore. So Anoshim shel tzura is a very big compliment. In English, the simple translation is great men. People that only have their tzura, there's no more chaymer. And therefore, Zilgabeyon, go to them, Dilivarchuch, so they should bless you. Now Azal, his son, went. Ashkechinu, when he went to them, these two Tanoim were discussing something. He did not interrupt them. So not only did he get a bracha later, he also and he's recording that conversation. They were having a conversation by pointing out the following contradiction. It says in Mishli, Pales Magal Raglecha, that weigh the course of your feet. And v'chol derachecha yokainu, and all your ways should be established, explains what we call Rashi. That if a person has foresight, that in the near future there are going to be two different mitzvah opportunities coming their way, and they will not be able to do both, weigh, be smart, do the bigger one. What does it mean, the bigger one? Let's not go there. Whichever one is, do the bigger one. But it says there in Mishli the opposite. It says, Oira Chaim, pen to follows. That the path of life, you know what living means? Don't weigh things. Like Rashi says, stop weighing. The first mitzvah that comes to you, do the mitzvah. Gadol, Katan, Chaparain, the first one. Even though, based on the rule that ha'oisik b'mitzvah, pata ben mitzvah will mean that while you're doing the smaller one, you won't be able to do the bigger one. Doesn't matter. So should you weigh, should you not weigh? So that's the contradiction. He's overhearing this. So they answered like kasha, kan b'mitzvah she'ef shel asoyse el adei acherim, Rashi marsha. Rashi here, what we call Rashi, says that when there is another, both mitzvahs will happen, because if you're not going to do it, someone else will do it. So Rashi says, then you know which one you should do? The greater one. Daf Tesamad Beis. But when should you not weigh b'mitzvah she'i efshel asoisai aledei achedim? Then, since one of them will not be done, do the first one. The Marsha beautifully says the opposite. It's common for the Marsha to argue with Arishain, to argue with Rashi, and I want to read a few words. Rashi, the Marsha says something that really resonates by people who learn Hasidus, and that is that if the goal of the mitzvah is for me to be connected to God, then there is some reason why I should do the bigger one, because it's some sort of bigger connection. But we are strongly advised, and we have a good chinuch that God forbid, almost God forbid, the goal of the mitzvah is for God's will to happen in the world, for God's will to happen in the world. And therefore he says the opposite, that if both mitzvahs are going to get done, why do you have to do the bigger one? Who cares? God is going to get what he wants. Do the first one. You're going to get the smaller one, and that guy will get the bigger one. So what? Let him get the bigger one. So his Gan Eden will be bigger, good for him. God's will happen. Only if you know that God's will won't, both mitzvahs cannot happen. So for God, it's better for the bigger one to happen. Only then are you allowed to do the bigger one. How beautiful is this, Marshal? Back over here. Then, now they're learning. They didn't even notice the son of the Rashbi. He's not interrupting their learning. So weiter, they continue to have a discussion, which is a little bit connected. And what's their discussion? It says in Mishlei, this is in reference to the Torah, that Torah is more precious than pearls. None of human desires, none of your desires can even compare to Torah. Now, none of your desires implies, my friends, that our desires cannot compare to Torah. But God's desires, what's God's desires? Mitzvahs. Mitzvahs, they could be compared to Torah. What does that mean? Torah mitzvahs. Which one is greater? My friends, do you stop learning Torah to do a mitzvah? Do we stop learning Torah to daven, to put on tefillin? We're not even speaking about davening. I take that back. That's another topic. There's really three. There's Torah, tefillah, and mitzvahs. Tosfos brings in tefillah. The Gemara is only speaking about Torah and mitzvahs. So here it says that only your desires don't compare to Torah, which implies cheftzei shamayim, God's desires, which means mitzvahs. They are comparable, and therefore you put learning of Torah aside, and yes, you do the mitzvah when the mitzvah has to be done. But it says in another verse in Mishlei, v'chol chafatzim lo yishvu ba. No desires, or all desires, do not compare to Torah learning, which means afilu cheftzei shamayim, even doing mitzvahs, which is God's desires, lo yishvu ba, is not comparable. So what's greater, Torah or mitzvahs? Now, my friends, all of this sugya is unpackaged beautifully. I'm just giving one source that at the end of Tanya and Kuntras Achron, right in the beautiful Lohavin Mashakos of a Priyetz Chaim, that's the whole Kuntras Achron. Speaking about Torah, mitzvahs versus, like Tosfos, the top Tosfos speaks about tefillah. And I want you to know that generally Rav Shimon Bar Yochai did not stop his Torah learning for mitzvahs, did not, I'll take that back. He stopped it for mitzvahs, but he didn't stop it for prayer. So that's the question. Do you stop learning Torah to do mitzvahs, or do you not? So they answered, it depends. If the mitzvah at hand will get done, then don't stop learning Torah. But when do we say that the mitzvah is even greater than Torah? That Torah is more precious than your desires, but it's not greater than God's desires, is b'mitzvah she'i efshel la'asos aladei achedim. And that generally goes on every mitzvah that we have to do, like putting on tefillin. In other words, the mitzvah will be done. If you put on tefillin, you did your tefillin, but the mitzvah of my tefillin I have to do, then you have to stop and you put on your tefillin. And again, here's where Tosfos points out that we don't say that regarding prayer, but that's only for people that have a level of Torah learning, which is called Teirasan Umunasan Ve'en Chanamakim. So at this point, they realize that the son of the Rashbi is there. So Amrulei, they tell them, my bo isachi, why are you here? Amar lahu. So he told them, the Amar li Abba, because my father told me, Zil Gabayhu, I should go to you, Dilavarchuch, for you to bless, you meaning you in plural, for you to bless me. And okay, so Amar le, this is Chavra, listen to this bracha. Number one, Yehid Abba, may be the will of God, the Sizra that you should sow, S-O-W, or plant, Veloy Sech Tzad, but you should not reap. Ta'ayil, you should go out, or you should bring out, Ta'ayil, you should bring in, V'loi tepuk, but don't bring out. Tepuk, bring out, but you should not bring in. Lechrav Beisach, may your house be destroyed, V'leisoiv ushpizach, and may your inn be inhabited. Levalbel pesoirach, may your table be disturbed. Azad juicy bracha, right? And may you not see a new year. Now, you have to understand something, that he knew that this is not a curse. He just didn't understand what the bracha is. So he wasn't afraid, but he was in tsar. So ki asa lagabavu, when he came to his father, Amar lei. The son tells the father, Loi mi boya, not only the berucha loy birchan, that I didn't hear a blessing, avol tseuran, they put me in pain again. The Marsha says, he didn't say that they cursed me. He knew it's not a curse, but it's something painful. Amar lei, so the father, Rashbi, asked the son, my amrulach. So he repeated. And by the way, the reason, according to some, why the Rashbi packaged the bracha in a way that it sounded like the opposite, is because they wanted to bless the son and they wanted to bless the Rashbi. And they were certain that if they're going to give him a bracha packaged like an opposite, he will repeat every word to their father. So the Gemara doesn't have to write it down, but he repeated verbatim. So Amar Leisu, the Rashbi told his son, Hanach kula birchasinino. Every line is what a blessing. Number one, Tiz Ravaloi Sechtzad, may you sow and not reap. What does that mean? That soiled banim, that may you give birth, may you father children, and may they not pass away. The passing away of a child is called reaping. Ta'ayil, that Veloi Sepuk, bring in and don't take out. Who do you bring in? So Rashi writes that it was common then that when you got married, the sons lived with their parents. So the family of the Chassan brought in the Kala. So ta'ayel kalasa, bring in daughter-in-laws, and the bracha was v'loili musa benach, and your sons will not die, because if the sons were to die, God forbid, then the daughter-in-laws will go back to their families. Bring in and don't give out. Then the opposite, take out and don't bring in, which means that you should also give birth to daughters, and they should get married. That's included. And when they get married, that's the bracha, so they move in with that was the minig with the family of the chassan. And v'loyimusu govrayun, and God should make it that the son-in-law should have a long life, and therefore they should remain there. They shouldn't come back. Ulahadri l'sevach, right? Next statement. Lechrav beisach, may your home be destroyed, and may your inn be inhabited. V'loisev ushpizach. So he beautiful, says the Rashbi, that the high alma, the physical world, is only called an inn. An inn is where you live for a very short amount of time. The next world is called your permanent home. You can argue that was then where, how long did a person live? You live for 70, 80 years. We state in Pasuk. 120 years. From the passing until coming back with Chias HaMesim, thousands of years. So where are you really spending more time? Over there in Yenevelt. So, and as it says in Tehillim, Kirbam Bateim La'olam, it's a Gavaldic expression, that in the David HaMelech says, in their imagination, their homes are forever. That, people think you're going to be here forever. But really it means, I'll take a Kirbam, which means imagination, but it means Kivarim, that the Kavod is your home forever. Your permanent home is the next world. So the Gavaldic, so he's telling them, may your home be destroyed. Live in the inn. May you have a long life. Weiter, levalbel pesoirach, may your table be disturbed. This is simple. Whose table is a disturbed table? The first wide line. A person who has a lot of children around the table, or a lot of grandchildren. Bebani benasa. If you don't have children or grandchildren, your home becomes a museum. So the brach is, may your table be disturbed. Now the final one is amazing. May you not see a new year. How can that be a bracha? Of course, because there is a mitzvah for a man to rejoice with his wife for the Shana Rishayna. And when you want to give a bracha to a man that he should remain married, not that his wife should be, not that he should become a widower, not that he should become a divorced man, you bless him, may you never have another Shana Rishayna. That's what the bracha meant. For your wife not to pass away or divorce. For you not to marry another woman. Now, being that I'm sitting on this side of the mic, so these are the words that I would like to propose. So you have really, it fits, or at least I hope it fits, that sowing, planting is connected to Chachma, and children is connected to Bina, and taking in a kala is connected to Chesed, marrying out daughters is connected to Gevura, long life is connected to Tiferes, which is connected to learning Torah, a table and children is connected to Yesoid, and a wife is Malchus. L'chayra, this is a bracha which goes through, like I mentioned, Chachma, Bina, Chesed, Gevura, Tiferes, Yesoid, and Malchus. All right, now, says the Gemara, the second wide line, similar story, Rab Shimon ben Chalafta, he was taking leave from Rav, Amar lei, liberei, that's the version. So Rab Shimon told his son, Zil ligabei, go to him, go to Rav, so Rav should give you a bracha. And Amar lei, so Rav gave a bracha, Yehi Rava may be Gazvil, Deloi Sivoish, that may you not embarrass others, and may you not be embarrassed from others. Now here, the bracha was not packaged in some sort of apparent opposite of bracha. He told him a statement that sounded almost like a simple bracha, like, of course. And he went to his father and he told him, and Amalei my Amalach. Again, he told him words because, again, the word is he wanted his son to repeat it to his father. Milan ba'almu da Amarli. Give me a ordinary bracha. Ordinary bracha. Askar alatzian. People, that was the biggest bracha in the world. People would get askar alatzian. Yeah. Askar alatzian. Bracha vatzlacha. So Amarli, so he tells him, not ordinary. That bircha said the bircha kosher bircha li Yisrael. No, he gave you a bracha that God already gave to the people, and He repeated it to you. And you should know the repetition of a bracha in itself is the greatest bracha. Al derech, by a dream, you have a dream twice, it comes quicker. He repeated something that you already had. And where do we have this type of bracha in the Torah? It says, V'achaltam oichol, you're going to eat food, v'savay, you'll be satisfied, v'yilaltam, you're going to praise God. And it says, V'lo yevoishu ami lo'olam, that my people will never be ashamed, right? Evermore. And then it says, there's a repetition in the pasuk. And what does the repetition mean? It means this word, that when it comes to shame, it's equally a bracha that we should never embarrass others, and we should not be embarrassed by others. So we have 2 times a story, and again, l'chayda, the varta here is that there's a big power in a blessing. And even when the son repeated the bracha to his father, just repeating what he was told, that was a bracha given to us. That's how powerful speech is. Let's go weiter. Going back to the dinim of Chol HaMoed. Says the Gemara by the 2 dots, that va'oisa isha tachshiteha, a woman is allowed to put on tachshitin on Chol HaMoed, both hygiene and makeup. So, Tana Rabbanan, what is makeup? Everything has to be in the Torah. Makeup means koichelas, painting the eyes, upaisekas, parting the hair, umavira sarak alpanan, applying rouge on one's face, or ve'ika da amri, that ma'averes, the girsa sakin, alpanel shalmata, passing a razor on the places in the body where you want to remove the hair. And the Gemara says a story that the Visu, the Rab Chizda, the wife of Rab Chizda, at that time Rab Chizda was not the greatest youngster, but Mekashta ba'an pikalasa, she was putting on makeup in front of her daughter-in-laws, with her daughter-in-laws, and so in other words, people knew that she's putting on makeup on Chol HaMoed. And Yosef Rafuna bar Chinan, kamed Rab Chizda, the Yosef Amar, who I heard that your wife puts on the makeup on Chol HaMoed, but Lo Shanu, l'chora, this is only taught who can put on makeup, a yalda, a young woman. Aval Zakena, oh my God. At least he didn't tell it to the wife of Rab Chizda. He told it to Rab Chizda. But an elderly woman, it's not necessary. Amar lei, Rab Chizda responds, Ha Eloikim, Riboyena Yishalaylam. You know who's allowed to put on makeup? Even your mother. You know what? Even your grandmother. Afilo imach. How great is this? Afilo ima de imach. Even a woman who's standing already over her grave. She can put on makeup because there's a saying that Bas Shitin, that a woman who's 60 is just like a 6-year-old. Lekol tavla rahato. She runs to the sounds of a wedding music. She hears music, she enjoys it like a youngster. Rashi says that's associated with you hear wedding and you get into a mode and you're a freilach, and they both equally put on makeup. Right there. Rabbi Yehuda says, now I have to make a correction. We're going to make a correction right now. When the Mishnah says that, Rabbi Yehuda says that a woman may not put that type of lime, again, on different parts of a body in which they would ultimately want for the hair to be removed. There was some sort of depilatory mechanism. It was a little bit painful. Today there's much better instruments, which are also not that comfortable. But Rabbi Yehuda says, Lo sasut. And we explained because it creates a nivel for her. So I want to clarify something. So the Gemara says, Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer, here we have the same words in the Mishnah. Isha lo yisasad, a woman may not apply lime. She may not apply lime on the parts of her body, and that lime would sit there. I said rip off. No, that's not the Mishnah. They would put it there, it would remain for a long time, and it would like take the hair out with its root. That is what Rabbi Yehuda disallows, because she would be for a very long time very uncomfortable. But because it disfigures her, because while it's on her, doesn't look, it's the opposite of attractive. But Moed Rabbi Yehuda agrees. Here we go. Can you please take off these pictures? That the besid sheyachayla lekaple b'moed, that when you have lime, that there they would put it on, and then they would rip it off. That they're allowed to do. Even though the lime would be on them for a minute, for 2 minutes, even though now it's disfigured, but afterwards it's going to look good. You can put it on and peel it off or rip it off on Chol HaMoed. And here are the words. He actually, even though while it was on, it was uncomfortable. and while it was on, it was unattractive. We're not talking about the pain of the removal itself. While it's on, it's tsar. But you know what? After you remove it, semechi la'achar zman.
What's the one that you can't put on if it's going to stay on during Yom?
Well, Danny, I don't think it stayed on for a week, but I think they would put on lime and it would just stay on for a couple of days. That's the way I understand it. It would stay on for a much longer amount of time. I don't know what longer means in Bepoil Mamash. Now, this is a problem, because this concept of right now it's uncomfortable, but it's going to bring me to wow, whatever the wow, and it's going to bring me simcha. How do you look at the present? Do you look at the future? And not if, Rabbi Yehuda is saying that we look at the future, so she's allowed to put on that type of depilatory, that contradicts another halacha. Let me say it by heart. There's a rule, the beginning of Masechtas Avodah Zarah, that if you interact with idol worshippers, Tosfos says in Avodah Zarah that even though Christianity is idol worship, but being that most of the people in Europe in the times of Tosfos only practice the religion, mitzvahs hanashim milamada, they're just following the traditions of the parents, so this halacha doesn't apply nowadays. But when people are real believers in their Avodah Zarah religion, you may not do business with them, not only not on their holiday, with a small h, their Getchka holiday, already 3 days prior you can't interact with them, because when they make profit, they're going to attribute it to their Getchka, and they're going to praise their God on their Yom Tov. Now, that also includes you may not pay back a loan to them. Question is, can you receive payment from them? Now, receiving payment, what would be the problem? So here you go. Many people, even though while they pay money, when I owe you money and I pay you, at that moment it's a bit painful, but after time I feel relieved. So here we're going to see Rabbi Yehuda goes to the opposite side. Umi Isla Rabbi Yehuda Haisfara, that since later this joy, you are allowed to do it on Chol HaMoed, even though right now you have tsar, but v'hatnan, we learned in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda says that nifroyin mehem, you can receive payment from them within 3 days of their Getchka holiday, mipnei shem meitzar, right? Mipnei shem meitzar means because when they pay you the money, they're not feeling joy, they're feeling the anguish of becoming deep-pocketed. But the sages disagree with him. Amru loy, no, afal pi shemeitzer loy achshav, but semeachu la'achar zman. But they're going to be happy when they're going to realize this debt is paid off. So Rabbi Yehuda is on the opposite side of this svara. So answers the Gemara, Amarav Nachman by Yitzchak, Hanach le'ilchas moed. No, Chol HaMoed is different. Because everyone must hold that on Chol HaMoed you are allowed to do things, even if right now while you're doing it it's not that exciting, but because it will bring joy. The greatest example is making food on Chol HaMoed. Ask leaders, you know how much work you do on Chol HaMoed? Tirchi Yisera. So you ask a woman, all of our wives, you know how many meals we have over the last days of Yontiv? So how can she make the food? It's because it's going to bring to the joy of Yom Tiv. So everyone by Chol HaMoed has to go to that. The Kulu Meitzar Achshav V'Smeach La'achar Zman. Or Ravina has another answer. He says that Rabbi Yehuda holds, unlike Yidden, that when they pay a debt, there is a certain joy that they have La'achar Zman that is paid. These idol worshippers never felt joy. They only felt the tzad that they paid their money back. Ravina Amar Kuti Le'ingen Peroyen Lo'oila Meitzar. Let's go weiter. Omar, now that we're speaking now a little bit more about the depilatories. Omar Rabbi Yehuda. Guys, we had this a little bit also in Megillah, right? The Sheman HaMoed of Esther. That Benois Yisrael Shegila Pirkan, if you have a Jewish woman that Higila Pirkan means that her body is beginning to mature. There are certain body hairs that are growing. But she's too young for that to happen yet, so she was uncomfortable with it. She's not even 12 years old and she has pubic hair or whatever the scenario is. You want to get rid of hair, so there's systems. How do we take off the hair? So, like everything else, depends how wealthy you are. If a person cannot afford, then they would use this plaster, this sid, which was the most painful method. Ashirais, if the wealthier families, they would use fine flour. Benois Malachim, they would use Sheman HaMoed. As it says regarding Achashverosh, Shish Chadoshim Sheman HaMoed. What is Sheman HaMoed? What type of oil is that? Guys, we have to make a kill. We have to sell the Sheman HaMoed. It's a big business. It's Rabbi Yehuda Bar Chia Amar, it's setakat. What is setakat? So Rabbi Yirma Bar Amma explains, it's oil, olive oil that comes from olives that were taken off their trees when they were only a third mature. The oil from that, you smear it on the body, it has a koyach of removing your hair. And Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Omer, same thing, that apikinoin is the name of a shemen zayis of oil from olives, shelo hiviu shlish. And why did they make these anpikinon oils? Where's Jonathan? You have to make, people should make this and call it anpikinoin, and go public and give a few dollars to Aiden. That v'lama sachanoi is saying, why did people smear themselves with that oil? Because it has a double benefit. On one hand, shamashet es haseir, it removes hair, and duma'aden es habasar, and it causes your skin to glow. Wow, your skin is glowing. Rabibi, yeah.
Oh wait, applying line during Chol HaMoed, do we not compare that for men, like getting a haircut?
No, getting a haircut is something that we may not do on Chol HaMoed, with few exceptions, because you could have done it prior to. And l'chayra, this type of hair removal is something that was done prior to Yom Tif, and then you got to do it again. That's when you're allowed to do it. Rabibi. And also, okay, let's go right. Rav Bibi Havalei Brato. Rav Bibi had a daughter, and what in between the lines is that his daughter had a lot of body hair, and that was not considered attractive. And he learned Rosh Hashanah, he learned Moed Katan Daf Tes. You know what? He knew, and he might have not been the more wealthiest guy, so he had the line, but he also heard that it's tsar, this whole debate. It's not so pashut. So when he would direct his daughter to use this type of depilatory, Aver. Tafla Aver. It's a little bit at a time. It's painful, and she was able to tolerate it, so she continuously did it, and she became very beautiful, to the point that when she went to get married, someone paid her 400 zuz to get married. Now, normally, the girl comes with a dowry. I don't know by whom, by somewhere, someone out there got money when they got married. But here was the opposite. That's how beautiful she was. So when people saw that, so Hava Hukuti Bishlevu, say there was a Psanan Jew in the neighborhood who also had a daughter. And if she will have this depilatory, someone is going to give me 400 zuz to marry her. But the problem was that he put this lime on her all at once. And it caused her so much distress that she passed away. Tafla b'chad zimna umeisa. And I think there's an inner story. The inner story is that gevura and introspection and pain, you have to be careful. Too much will kill you. A little bit. A lot of joy, a little bit of tsar. Amar of Katla. Amar, and he said, excuse me, so this Ekuti, this non-Jew said, Katla Bibi livrati. Bibi killed my daughter. That's called blaming someone else. He did not do what he did. He overdid it. He did it all at one time. Now the Gemara is addressing the root of the problem. The root of the problem here is they want to get rid of hair. Why is there so much body hair? This is the answer. Amar Rav Nachman, Rav Bibi, since the Shasi Shichra, since there was a lot of beer consumed in his household, that's why Bayon ben Nasi Tifla, his daughters needed this treatment. And because like Rashi says, that beer stimulates excessive hair growth, and it also darkens the skin. So this type of therapy both took away the hair and it made the skin glow again. So it was needed. But Anan, Rav Nachman says, we don't drink beer, therefore v'loy bayin b'nasin tifla. The hair lachatchila doesn't have to be removed, so we don't have a danger, we don't have any tsar. So if we're making this ruchnisdik association that sometimes we indulge and we have to do tshuva and don't overdo tshuva, God forbid, do tshuva, shlema, but do it in a way where it works, not where you over self-guilt yourself. Zindik nisht. Don't sin. The Frierdiker Rebbe once came to visit the yeshiva in Atvatsk. So the Bachrim, the Rebbe is here, they skipped Tachron. The Rebbe is here. So the Rebbe turned around. The Rebbe says, why isn't there Tachron? So he says, because the Rebbe is here. So he says, the Rebbe is here is a reason not to sin. It's not a reason not to say Tachron. So that's the end, is to stay away from activities that are not considered good. And we won't have to undergo the tsar, which is necessary to rectify chevra, a lot more to be continued.